I've been covering the region since 2003, and I've been living out of a bag mostly since then. And part of the privilege and responsibility of doing that is I've traveled the world and watched this BDS campaign build momentum over the last 5 years. And just before I left Bethlehem last week, I watched as the final touches were put on the Apartheid week in Bethlehem, including the 3 refugee camps of Aza, Aida, and Dahesha. And people should be proud of what's going on in Palestine and in many cities across the world, Toronto being, I think, first and foremost among those. So congratulations for all your hard work, and thanks for having me. Sometimes this type of activism, sometimes called nonviolent activism, is said to be more of a threat to Israel than the armed struggle. I'm not sure that I'm going to parrot that exactly. I was in Bethlehem 2 weeks ago when Hassan Nasrallah gave his speech, and Israeli warplanes buzzed the sky all night long while Nasrallah spoke, shaking our coffee mugs. But it's important to note that the BDS campaign has definitely affected Israeli government policy. A recent report from the Reut Institute, a government think tank that exclusively provides information to the Israeli government, released a report talking about hubs of delegitimization taking place around the world. And this report talked about the BDS campaign as being a new strategic battleground for the entire Israeli foreign policy apparatus. They talked about using embassies in places like Canada, where Toronto is one of the leading hubs of delegitimization, to using these embassies as forward operating bases and to get serious about combating the movement. So I guess in some ways that's a salute, and in other ways it's probably a message that it's time to buckle up, because both sides are taking this extremely seriously. And they talked about in this report about the BDS movement being sophisticated, ripe, lucid, and coherent. And its effectiveness stems from its ability to mobilize. So there's a nod from the enemy for the work that's being done here. And I can say that many of the places that I travel in the world, I continue to meet up with Kaya alumni who are at the forefront in many cases of these movements and the hubs of delegitimization. So again, congratulations on your hard work. A little bit just about the apartheid analogy, because I think it's important to note that while these major think tanks are putting it on the radar, and the Parliament in Ontario and apparently soon the Canadian Parliament are dealing with motions to try to squelch the debate around using the term apartheid. As is generally the case in Israel itself, the term is not controversial and it's been used for years. And it's been used at the highest levels of government, both within Israel and here in Canada. And I have a quote from the leader of the Liberal Party, Michael Ignatieff, writing in 2002 in The Guardian. It's important to note that last year, of course, people probably remember Michael Ignatieff wrote an op-ed in the National Post condemning Apartheid Week. So it's on the radar both in Israel and here in Canada. But just to put it in perspective, this was Ignatieff in 2002 writing in The Guardian. 2 years ago, an American friend of mine took me on a helicopter ride from Jerusalem to the Golan Heights over the Palestinian West Bank. He wanted to show me how vulnerable Israel was, how the Arabs only had to cross 11 kilometers of land to reach the sea and throw the Israelis into it. I got his message, but I also came away with another one. When I looked down at the West Bank, at the settlement like crusader forts occupying the high ground, at the Israeli security cordon along the Jordan River closing off the Palestinian lands from Jordan, I knew I was not looking down at a state or the beginnings of one, but at a Bantustan, one of the pseudo-states created in the dying years of the apartheid regime to keep the African population under control. So the same people that are condemning it when they're making obvious observations even 8 years ago, these observations, of course, if Ignatieff were to take a helicopter ride over the West Bank, the Crusader forts and Palestinian ghettos are much clearer now than they were in 2002. And I'm going to talk a bit about that tonight and put Canada right in the heart of that program to transform the Palestinian national aspirations into a series of isolated ghettos surrounded completely by the apartheid wall, if you will, or separation barrier, as the Israelis call it. This wall is crucial to the next phase of the conflict, and I think that this might be the 6th Israeli Apartheid Week, but there's going to be many more, and I think that this paradigm will be at the core of it. And it was announced really in 2003 by Ehud Olmert, who at the time was Ariel Sharon's leading portfolio minister, foreign affairs, and various others. And he released it, he sort of released it as a trial balloon in an interview that he did with Haaretz, the leading liberal Israeli daily, which was, to get the apartheid analogy right out in the front. The headline on the front page story was "Maximum Jews, Minimum Palestinians." And the issue, the core of Israel, the issue is a demographic issue, of course, and today, at any given moment, the population is 50% Israeli Jew and 50% Palestinian Arab from the sea to the River Jordan. That's today. Of course, birth rates make that situation untenable going forward. And so the Israelis deal with this demographic threat in terms that they call the demographic bomb. And they consider it the utmost priority. So Ehud Olmert announcing for Sharon's disengagement from Gaza the idea of redeploying, not withdrawing, but redeploying from the Gaza Strip was a project that was carefully unfolded in order to create a series of Gaza Strips in the West Bank. And it's important to understand that. And if you only leave this talk with one thing, it's important to understand that the Palestinian state doesn't exist at the current moment, completely surrounded by the state of Israel, with no functioning border to the outside world, no independent foreign policy, no national army representing all Palestinians. This project was unfolded, and Ehud Olmert told it quite straightforwardly. He said, more and more Palestinians are uninterested in a negotiated two-state solution because they want to change the essence of the conflict from an Algerian paradigm to a South African one, from a struggle against occupation to a struggle for one man, one vote. That is, of course, Olmert said, a much cleaner struggle, a much more popular struggle, and ultimately a much more powerful struggle. For us, it would mean the end of the Jewish state. Now, Olmert became prime minister shortly after that. And in 2007, when he went to the Annapolis summit, which was one of these photo ops, or as Condoleezza Rice said, a little bit more than a photo op, dealing with the defunct peace process in an effort to create two states. The way the Crusader fort settlements and the Palestinian ghettos, the way the settler-only roads bisect the West Bank, the idea every day, literally every day, Israel is building every day, the two-state solution becomes less and less likely. And Ehud Olmert went in late 2007 to the Annapolis summit. He met with reporters on the plane as he was flying over, and he said, if the two-state solution collapses, Israel would face a South African-style struggle for equal voting rights. And as soon as that happens, equal voting rights, the state of Israel is finished. So you can see this is at the core of the Israeli planners. So when you see hysterical motions in the Ontario legislature and whatnot, it's important to keep this grounded in the fact that you have the leading political figures in Israel accepting this situation at face value. Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister during the last attempt to create a series of Palestinian ghettos during the Camp David process, spoke at the most important Israeli security conference just a couple weeks ago. And he said, if there's only one political entity between Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, it will either be non-Jewish or non-democratic. If the Palestinians vote in elections, it's a binational state. And if they don't, it's an apartheid state. So it's important to understand that right now in Israel, people are understanding, the top leadership is understanding that this is a crucial turning point in the conflict, that the idea of creating a Palestinian state is an absolute necessity, something that they've been blocking for 60 years is today more important than ever, mostly because of the fact that if it doesn't happen, the state of Israel will be seen to the whole world quite clearly, quite plainly, as Olmert, as Barak said, as an apartheid state. Now, I want to put Canada in the center of this because this project has been unfolding for a number of years because the goal is to create a Palestinian state. It won't look like any other state on earth, but they'll call it a state. And the ability to create legitimacy for this state is what's at stake right now. Nobody in the world accepts the apartheid wall as legitimate. And so what has to happen is that inside of that wall, the state itself has to be seen, if not by the people, then by the international community, with scare quotes around it, as legitimate. And so this is where Canada steps into this process. And it's no different in Palestine for Canada than it is in any other of the major strategic priority countries. Canada was, of course, first into Jean-Bertrand Aristide's office after the coup in Haiti. Canada's holding down the most important province in Afghanistan, Kandahar province, and have been since 2005. The heart of the Taliban insurgency, the Afghan insurgency. Canada's been involved in Iraq since the beginning. We have warships off the coast of Iran. Any major key strategic area in the world for U.S. foreign policy, you have Canadian influence as well. And I want to describe this process that's going on now. I mean, partially when I come from spending long periods of time overseas, I could just spend the whole time with anecdotes to describe what's going on, just the things I see outside my window every day. But I'm going to put this policy apparatus first and foremost to understand what's happening. Right now, there's a three-pronged strategy going on in the West Bank to create legitimization for the Palestinian quote-unquote state. And it's a three-part project that's led on the security front by United States Security Coordinator Keith Dayton. And Keith Dayton's been working since 2005 to create a Palestinian security force, a security force that at the moment is explicitly tasked with confronting Hamas, but not just Hamas, all the resistance factions. And it's coupled with two other processes that Canada's integrally involved with as well. Tony Blair, who's the quartet envoy, is creating, as he did throughout his decade as Prime Minister of the UK, is creating a neoliberal apparatus to go economically for the Palestinians, to create economic statistics that legitimize this process. And Salem Fayyad, who's an IMF official who's in the Karzai mold, airlifted back into his home after a life abroad, and he, of course, was the linchpin of the IMF World Bank process in Palestine throughout the throughout the Oslo peace process throughout the 1990s, which of course failed spectacularly and led to the Second Palestinian Intifada. This three-pronged strategy, Canada's most integrally involved in the Keith Dayton apparatus. And Keith Dayton has so far trained 6 Palestinian battalions trained in Jordan and dispatched throughout the West Bank into what Tony Blair calls model cities. And these model cities, one of them is Bethlehem, where I live. Another one of the model cities is Jenin, where I lived during the Intifada. And the idea with this Palestinian security force is to create legitimacy for the security operations that Israel can't unfold by entering the ghettos. People saw what happened with the war on Gaza and the delegitimization of Israel that came out of that when a highly powered military attacks a ghetto of helpless civilians who have nowhere to go. It's important, these are important linchpin moments in the delegitimization campaign. So it's important to have native forces on the ground. Now, these forces have primarily sought to target Hamas, who won the elections in 2006. Salem Fayyad himself was airlifted in because Israel arrested 42 members of the Hamas parliament, imprisoned them, and denied quorum to the Palestinian Legislative Council. Ashrawi has broken from Fayyad. So you're talking about the Prime Minister of Palestine has 1 seat in a parliament, in a 170-seat parliament. And he's been unfolding with the Dayton Project a targeted attack on Palestinian civil society. Israel calls it the Dawa strategy. The goal was to undermine Hamas, not just militarily, but also its civilian apparatus, its economic apparatus, its social services, which provide the underpinning of its popular support. There's been more than 1,000 arrests of Hamas and various other activists. Again, it's not simply Hamas. The PFLP has been targeted, but Hamas, being the leading resistance group at the moment, has faced the brunt of it. This project has been both violent and behind the scenes. In Qalqilia in May, 8 people were killed in the first of a in the first of the series of raids that were carried out on Hamas activists under the watchful eye of the Israelis. Qalqilia was the first ghetto, the first Gaza in the West Bank. So it's an important staging ground for these Dayton forces. And just anecdotally, to understand what's going on in the West Bank, you have a situation where you've turned a vibrant Palestinian civil society, a secular Palestinian civil society, into a model that looks like the Arab dictatorships of Egypt and Jordan. Now, this is a heartbreaking development for Palestinians because this vibrant culture is under attack in all ways. People are arrested in their mosques, in their schools, school teachers, health professionals, journalists are all being targeted. And the attack on this infrastructure is taking place in such a way that when I am in a cafe, for example, and somebody asks me what I did for the day, and I say I interviewed a Hamas finance minister, you know, they throw up their hands like in Jordan or Egypt and say, whoa, 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 hey, I just work here, I'm just trying to get some money to feed my kids, I'm not into politics. You know, this is never what it was like in Palestine before, but this apparatus that Canada is backing is at the core of creating this project to legitimate the ghettos and to create for the Palestinians a future state that is completely isolated, a complete series of ghettos within the West Bank. Canada's been at the core of this, and as Peter MacKay said, we can't be said to be following the Americans if we preempt them. Canada was first to boycott Hamas. Canada was the most strident in defending Israel's attack on Lebanon. And of course, as Tzipi Livni said, Canada is at the, quote, vanguard of the isolation of Iran. So it's important to understand Canada's foreign policy is at the core of creating what will be the next generation of this conflict. And Canada's deeply proud of it. It's not a secret. And you can see it all through their foreign policy documents. Thanks.